Without further ado, I'm here to introduce our speaker, who we'll hear from, and then after he speaks, we're going to do a little Q&A. A Romney guy interviewing an Obama guy. Michael Wear is the founder of Public Square Strategies, LLC, and a leading expert and strategist at the intersection of faith, politics, and the American public life. As one of President Obama's ambassadors to America's believers, that was a quote by Buzzfeed, Michael directed faith outreach for President Obama's historic 2012 re-election campaign. Michael was also one of the youngest White House staffers in modern American history. How old were you when you started at the White House? Way too young? 19, 20? About then? That's when we met for the first time. He served in White House's faith-based initiatives during President Obama's first term, where he led evangelical outreach and helped manage the White House's engagement on religious and values issues, including adoption and anti-human trafficking efforts. Today, Public Square Strategies is a sought-after firm that helps religious organizations, political organizations, businesses, and others effectively navigate the rapidly changing American religious and political landscapes. Michael is the author of Reclaiming Hope, right here, which you can buy in the back afterwards. Lessons learned in the Obama White House about the future. Please silence your phones. Let's find out who that was. Yeah. Michael is the author of Reclaiming Hope, Lessons Learned in the Obama White House about the future of faith in America. He also writes for The Atlantic, Christianity Today, USA Today, Relevant Magazine, and other publications on faith, politics, and culture. He serves on the national board of Bethany Christian Services, the nation's largest adoption agency, and holds an honorary position at the University of Birmingham's Cadbury Center for the Public Understanding of Religion. Michael and his wife, Melissa, are both proud natives of Buffalo, New York, but they reside now in Washington, D.C., and I think you'll probably be staying the night, not getting out of here with the blizzard coming in. I've known Michael for years. We met in Washington, D.C. When he was serving in the Obama administration, and I was proud to see him stand against his own party. That takes bravery. And with Colorado Christian University, he stood on our side in fighting SB 1146, which sought to strip Christian colleges in California of important grant funding for low-income students. Please welcome my good friend, Michael Wear.
Thanks. It is wonderful to be here with you all. It's I've been wanting to come to CCU for quite a long time. I'm a great admirer of Bill Armstrong, and was talking with my friend Luder Whitlock, who said Don Sweeting is one heck of a president. So really appreciate being here. It's an exciting time for me. My first book came out a couple months ago, and it was it's a very exciting thing. I'm just from Buffalo, never thought I'd write a book, and there are all these kinds of things that accompany writing a book, and my publisher reached out to me and said, "Michael, why don't we shoot a book trailer?" And I said, "Oh, great! That sounds kind of nice. I'll get a haircut for that." And we're going to do a book trailer by the monuments. The book trailer is online. You could watch it. The night before we taped the book trailer, I am chasing my cats around our house, and I break my toe. I can't walk. Well, the whole premise of the book trailer is me walking in front of the Lincoln Monument, me walking in front of the Jefferson Monument, but we only had the videographer there for this one day, so we had to do it anyways. So instead of looking like a book trailer for my book, it looks like the sequel to Forrest Gump. I am just kind of hobbling around D.C. in front of all these monuments. And so it just goes to show that sometimes the things you look forward turn out a little bit different than you thought, but it's been fun getting my book out, and it's wonderful being here with you all, and hopefully I won't break a toe during the evening together. What I thought I'd do just to open our time together, I'm really looking most forward to a conversation. Just want to tell you my story, how I got involved in politics, talk about 2016 and the election we just went through, and then talk about the state of our politics right now. Again, I'm from Buffalo, New York. I come from a big Italian Catholic family, but wasn't the most theologically reflective Catholicism. I tell people my favorite saints growing up were those associated with the best food. And so, St. Joseph's Day is coming up. St. Joseph has Sfingi, and so I was a St. Joseph guy. And so again, not the most theologically reflective faith, but my grandfather was very influential in my life, greatest generation, World War II, fought in Normandy, came back, served his community, served in his local union, led his union, and was just made a big impact in my life. Those civic values were something that were instilled in me very early. When I was 15, my sister had become a Christian a few years before I had, and the second she became a Christian, she started working on me like a homing missile. I mean, it was unbelievable. Everything. I couldn't turn around without her trying to walk me down Romans Road. Or one time she had one of those big, not really useful, but they look nice, those big, huge leather Bibles that you get when you first become a Christian, and you just want a Bible, but you're not really thinking of, wow, I'm going to have to lug this thing around. But that's what she had. And she's trying to walk me down Romans Road, and I stood up and I threw the Bible at her face. So I was not just indifferent towards religion. I was antagonistic. She kept on praying for me, though, and working on me. And when I was 15, she asked me to go to her youth group. And I thought, okay, I'll go to this youth group, and I'll learn some new information to use as ammunition against her, to show her how silly all this is. So I go to the youth group, and I didn't like the youth group at all. I didn't really fit in. It was kind of cliquey. She had a friend who knew that I wasn't a Christian, came up to me and said, Michael, what's your favorite book of the Bible? And I said, I didn't have a favorite book of the Bible. She goes, mine's Hezekiah. And I said, oh, mine too. Isn't that cool? We should be friends. We both have the same favorite book of the Bible. And it took me years to find out that she was just playing a mean joke on me. And you'd think I would get over it by now, but it's in my book. And so hopefully she reads it and knows what a jerk she was. That was mean. But on my way out of that youth group, there was a worship pastor, a good Italian guy by the name of Joe Vaccani, and he was a volunteer. Now he's a worship leader at the church, and he was just handing out tracts of Romans, just Romans, no commentary. And I took it home. He was standing by the garbage bin, so I got it, thought about throwing it out right in front of him, but that didn't seem to be too polite. So I held on to it, and instead of throwing it out, I took it home, read it that night, read it again, and it changed my life. 72 hours later, my sister was dropping me off from school, and I told her I'd given my life to Christ. Romans is a great antidote to someone who thinks that there's no there in religion. You could read Romans, and you could reject the argument that Paul lays out, but you can no longer say that there's no there in Christianity. You can no longer say that it's not a substantive faith, a faith that meets us in the very gritty details of our lives. So now everything had to change. I thought, well, now that I'm a Christian, I need to go to seminary, become a pastor, because what else does a good Christian do? I was with the head of the Denver Institute for Faith and Work earlier today, and I said, you would have straightened me out if I had been around you. But thankfully, I didn't have the Institute for Faith and Work, but I did have a good pastor and people around me. And I ultimately decided I wanted to figure out what it meant to be faithful in public things. So I went to George Washington University to be in the heart of D.C. I knew two things. There, that's working. I knew two things when I became a Christian about politics. The first is that politics was affecting faith, not just the other way around. Robert Putnam and David Campbell came out with an influential book in the mid-2000s called American Grace. And one of the primary findings of that book was that the beginnings of religious disaffiliation that we were starting to see among young people in particular, trends that have accelerated since they wrote the book. One of the reasons for that is that there was a combining of Christianity with partisan politics. And so people would think, well, if I'm not conservative, I must just not be a Christian. They seem to be the same thing. And so we often think about the influence that faith is having in our politics. But what was readily apparent to me in my tradition, and I'm Southern Baptist, when you first become a Christian, say your ignorance on fire, which is I wanted to tell everybody about Jesus but knew nothing about him. So you're just very fresh in the faith. So when I became a Christian, I started telling everybody, I'm Christian, would love to tell you about Jesus. And they'd say, oh, so that means you're going to be judgmental now and you're not going to like me. And I thought this thing that I'm so excited about is perceived to be a burden by so many others. And part of the reason for that was politics, of the witness of the faith they were seeing in the newspapers, in politics. The second thing I understood was that I was never going to feel comfortable in politics again. I didn't just change my views on God. God coming into my life changed my views on politics. And I knew that I was no longer going to be able to take marching orders from a political party platform. Like in many other areas of life, Christians are going to be uncomfortable in earthly structures and systems. It doesn't mean you don't participate in them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I knew pretty early on that I wasn't going to be able to be a loyal servant of any political master. What I want to do, let me just tell you this. So just for background on me, so I went to Washington, D.C., went to George Washington University, and in my first year there, was supposed to be leading a group of students to the Democratic Winter Convention in February of 2007. And so I get to the Washington Hilton Hotel. I'm all excited. It's my first political convention. I walk in the hotel, and no one's there. But I'm thinking, well, this is my first convention. I'll just open up a hotel door and pow, the convention will be there. So I walk around for 10, 15 minutes. I'm a guy, so it takes me a while to ask for directions. And I finally asked the receptionist, where is this political convention? And she goes, oh, honey, that's not for another couple days. I had completely the wrong date. So I'm embarrassed. I'm dejected. I'm walking through the Washington Hilton out the lobby, and Barack Obama is walking in. This was just a few days before he'd announced he was running for president. And he didn't, because he hadn't announced he was running for president yet, he didn't have a Secret Service detail around him. He just had a couple staffers. Didn't have a huge horde of fans, kind of. He basically walked right up to me. And I met him, told him I wanted to work for him. 10 months later, there were a lot of emails and sort of, hey, I'm around if you need me kind of things going on. But 10 months later, I was in Iowa working in the Iowa caucus, and I did faith outreach for the president, then senator, very early on. That led to, I worked in the National Prayer Service for the inaugural. There are a whole bunch of religious events around the inauguration. And then I went to work 3.5 years at the White House. And there, I served a number of roles. Primarily, I helped to make sure that moderate and conservative people of faith had a seat at the table in policy and outreach discussions. I worked on issues, like Jeff said, of adoption and anti-human trafficking efforts. And I helped the president navigate religious issues and relationships throughout our time. In May of 2012, I was asked to run faith outreach for the re-election campaign, so I did that. And then went back to lead religious affairs for the second inaugural, and that was sort of my time with the president. I'm sure Jeff is going to ask me about that. For these remarks, what I'd like to do is not focus on my time with the president, because we'll cover them in the Q&A, and talk a little bit about 2016. Trump's campaign message to religious Americans, particularly evangelicals, is that the challenges they face require a suspension of their values in politics. That it is now time to stop playing nice and start busting heads and disrupting the entire system. For conservative Christians who feel embattled, isolated, and marginalized by the onslaught of cultural change, from sexual liberation to same-sex marriage to the coarsening of culture, Trump promised that he would relieve the pressure. Perhaps many of the 81% of white evangelicals who supported Trump were uncomfortable with his approach to winning, but there was an even firmer sense that they could not afford to keep losing. This was on stark display at the second presidential debate, for instance, when Anderson Cooper asked in regard to the now infamous Access Hollywood tape, quote, "You called what you said locker room banter. You described kissing women without consent. That is sexual assault. You brag that you have sexually assaulted women. Do you understand that?" To which Trump replied, "I apologize to the American people. Certainly I'm not proud of it, but this is locker room talk." You know, and it's important, there's no cut here. This is I didn't cut anything. He said, but this is locker room talk. You know, when we have a world where you have ISIS chopping off heads, where you have, and frankly, drowning people in steel cages, where you have wars and horrible, horrible sights all over, where you have had so many bad things happening, this is like medieval times. We haven't seen anything like this carnage all over the world. Trump framed concern with what he characterized as typical male speech as a luxurious distraction, basic morality as a weakness in the face of evil. Trump's outreach to religious people consisted of telling them he was the only one who could save them and the country from what was coming: terrorism, a loss of religious freedom, the ratification of abortion as a moral good, and that he would offer them not just protection, but power. His message was to affirm conservative Christians' sense of isolation and vulnerability and to offer himself as the only way out. The debate line Trump used to deflect from his Access Hollywood comments was not new. He used it at Liberty University. This is another quote. At Liberty University, he said, "We're going to protect Christianity, and I can say that. I don't have to be politically correct. We're going to protect it. You know," and I asked Jerry Falwell Jr., and I asked some of the folks, because I hear this is a major theme right here, but 2 Corinthians 3:17, that's the whole ballgame. Where the Spirit of the Lord, right? Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And here, there is Liberty College, but Liberty University, but it is so true. You know, when you think, and that's really, is that the one? Is that the one you like? I think that's the one you like because I loved it. And it's so representative of what's taken place. But we are going to protect Christianity. And if you look at what's going on throughout the world, you look at Syria, where if you're Christian, they're chopping off heads. You look at the different places, and Christianity, it's under siege. This helps us understand how a majority of Trump's voters could question his temperament and fitness for office and still think he's the man for the job. Even if evangelicals' morality was on the losing side of the culture, which Trump's candidacy was a walking reminder that it was, they could be protected through a more forceful exertion of power. This explains Trump's unusual focus on the Johnson Amendment, a provision banning the endorsement of candidates from the pulpit or through the use of church resources. I've been involved in religion and politics for a decade now, and I had never before heard any mainstream religious leader prioritize the Johnson Amendment. Only a quarter of evangelicals believe an endorsement from the pulpit would be appropriate. Yet Trump went around the country, putting the repeal of the Johnson Amendment at the forefront of his outreach. The Clinton campaign ran a campaign that employed religious references, primarily as a way to accentuate a critique of her opponent's moral character, but it included little outreach to the religious community from the candidate herself. Hillary never directly asked for the support of broad swaths of religious America. She never had an interview with a major evangelical publication or outlet. Her campaign decided, as Democrats have often desired to, that religious voters, with limited exceptions, did not need to be sought in order to win. This view largely applied to Catholics, which account for over 20% of the electorate. 2 days after the election, the New York Times reported that Hillary Clinton's own supporters had reached out to the campaign asking them to send Hillary to a St. Patrick's Day event in South Bend, Indiana, home of the Fighting Irish. If you're going to attend a St. Patrick's Day event anywhere, South Bend is not like a bad place to choose. Previous Democratic presidential candidates, to my understanding, have attended this event. Other statewide Democratic candidates were going to attend. This wasn't a hostile environment. The message that Hillary Clinton's own supporters got from the highest reaches of her campaign, and I'm only roughly paraphrasing here, is white Catholics are not a constituency Hillary needs to be reaching out to this election. They're 17% of the electorate. She sure wasn't reaching out to white evangelicals. What kind of arrogant campaign do you run that cuts out about half the country and says that I don't even have a message to these voters, and then suggests that you're running to be president of all Americans? Clinton would go on to lose the election, of course. She would win only 16% of white evangelicals. She would be the first Democratic nominee since 2004 to lose the Catholic vote. In fact, among religious constituencies, she would only gain in support over Obama's 2012 numbers among two categories, atheists and the Jewish community. And the Jewish community, she only gained 2 points within the margin of error. In my view, these results are evidence of a view of faith from all parties, the Trump campaign, the Clinton campaign, and voters, that is malnourished and utilitarian. It is evidence of a politics that is deeply corroded, misdirected from its aims. What became clear to me over the last year, in particular, is that politics is causing great spiritual harm. Spiritual harm is reflected most clearly in our national anxiety. The American Psychological Association found that 52% of Americans are feeling additional stress due to the election. They call it election stress disorder, and recommended steps people can take for relief. Teachers report students are fearful about the election outcome, even to the extent that they are having nightmares about it. Political campaigns, they understand and feed into this emotional pull of politics. Increasingly, political messages are not about policies. Instead, the policies proposed on the campaign trail are about sending a message and propping up a desired narrative. Our politics is both driven by and guiding our emotions. The influence of political tactics is not confined to campaign dynamics. It affects how we are formed as people. Political polarization is at an all-time high. Instead of our values influencing our politics, our political circumstances are shaping our values. As partisans, we explain away the flaws of the candidates we support and buy nearly any outlandish theory about the candidate we oppose. A survey came out that just weeks after the inauguration of Trump, Democrats were much more accepting of conspiracy theories. In 2015, white evangelicals were asked if they thought the ethical and moral character of their presidential candidate was important when considering their vote. 2/3 said yes, it was. In 2016, the same question was asked. White evangelicals, the numbers flipped. Only 1/3 said it was. Well, what happened? Was new scripture introduced? Was there a new sign from God? No, the Republican Party had a nominee that evangelicals couldn't defend his morality. And so instead of holding that intention and saying, well, out of the options available, he's the guy we have to go with, but we're not going to affirm. No, they said, well, morality and character are not so important anymore. This polarization has seeped into our very communities. We used to think of Washington, D.C., first of all, it was, and I'm not trying to be romantic here and go back to golden age, you used to be able to get together, Republicans and Democrats. It didn't used to be as polarized as it is today. But even then, we used to be able to look out from outside the Beltway and say, oh, look, D.C., those crazy people can't get along and they're calling each other names. And we used to think it was contained to those 68 square miles of Washington. What we're seeing now is that polarization has seeped out of Washington into our very own communities. Political polarization is at an all-time high. That's what a Stanford study in 2014 showed. And one of the amazing stats they used to show this was in the 1960s, parents were asked, who would you not want your child to marry? And in the 1960s, the answer was, I would not want my child to marry someone of a different race, and I would not want my child to marry someone of a different religion. 2014, the same question was asked. If the parent was a Republican, I would not want my child to marry a Democrat. If the parent was a Democrat, I would not want my child to marry a Republican. Think about what it means if our most intimate social relationships are driven by partisan identity. Think about what that means if it's compounded generationally. Not just for our political decisions, what about just how we live together? Other studies have come out recently that have shown that, well, we aren't living together. We're segregated ideologically by region, so we only live with people who think the same way that we do. These are significant problems. C.S. Lewis understood the temptation to seek personal meaning in politics. He wrote an essay, Membership, in which he wrote, a sick society must think much about politics, as a sick man must think much about his digestion. However, if either comes to regard it as the natural food of the mind, if either forgets that we think of such things only in order to be able to think of something else, then what was undertaken for the sake of health has become itself a new and deadly disease. Our culture and many people in our churches are sick with that new and deadly disease. Politics is causing great spiritual harm in Americans' lives, and a big reason for that is Americans are going to politics to have their spiritual needs met. This is the meaning of rising polarization. This is the meaning of zero-sum politics. Politics does a poor job of meeting spiritual needs, but if it will get your vote, politicians will attempt to fill the spiritual void nonetheless. Our politics can only cause such spiritual harm because our national life has become so spiritually vacuous. It is real hope that is needed in this season of disappointment. When I used to walk into the Oval Office, if I had a moment, I'd always stare at the carpet. The president, so presidents, when they get into office, they get a budget to sort of spruce things up and make them how they like them. That's why 6 months from now, the Oval Office is going to be plated gold with the words Trump on it. I like that joke. President Obama didn't quite do that, but what he did do is he designed a carpet, and on the outside of the carpet is a quote that is now a part of our political dialogue, used to bless a whole range of political programs and arrangements, and you'll know it when I say it. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How many of y'all have heard that phrase uttered from politicians in the last 8 years? The sentence is often attributed to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., but King was quoting another clergyman, Theodore Parker. Parker wrote in the early 19th century that from what he could see, that arc bends toward justice and reminds readers that things refuse to be mismanaged long. He wrote, Jefferson trembled when he thought of slavery and remembered that God is just. Ere long, all America will tremble. King used a version of the phrase in the article for a small Christian newsletter over a century later, but what remained constant was its connection to the initiative and involvement of God. In context, he wrote, those of us who call the name of Jesus Christ find something at the center of our faith which forever reminds us that God is on the side of truth and justice. Good Friday may occupy the throne for a day, but ultimately it must give way to the triumphant beat of the drums of Easter. Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross, but that same Christ will rise up and split history into AD and BC so that even the life of Caesar must be dated by his name. And then, and only then, after he had said all that, could King write, yes, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The idea was only intelligible to King when joined with a confidence in Christ and in God's nature and faithfulness. The arc of the moral universe does not bend toward justice because of a political program or the unassailable motives of humans, but because of a God who wills justice. History, then, is not about human progress, but is as one theologian put it, about God breaking into human history to establish his reign and to advance his purposes. It is hope that makes way for us, not the other way around. There is indeed an arc to the moral universe, but it is not a matter of humanity progressing toward justice. Rather, it is the God of justice who is moving towards us. This opens our eyes to the present, and this hope must inform our present. As I close, just want to suggest two ways in which I think hope will lead us, two obligations of hope. First, hope will lead us to make commitments. In America, individualism has always been in creative tension with the power and authority of institutions. At its best, this tension makes both better. Our institutions benefit from individuals' discontent with the status quo, and Americans benefit from the depth of thought and supportive structures that only institutions can provide. We are now out of balance. Our institutions are starved by a perspective that views withdrawal and a rejection of institutional commitments as an act of righteousness. In American politics, we see this most clearly in the rise of political independence. The percentage of Americans who are political independents is at an all-time high, 43%. 50% of millennials are independents. We have a number of slogans used to describe independent voters. They think for themselves. They're prophets daring to shout a pox on both your houses. They are rejecting the false set of choices Washington gives us and transforming our politics. Like many popular slogans, however, these statements are simply not true. In a two-party system of government, in a party-based system of government of any kind, to become an independent is to check out of the system. It is to unilaterally disarm, to give up one of the primary levers we have as citizens to influence our political system. Withdrawal is not a prophetic message that those in power ought to shape up. They're not listening. Your voice is not heard when you don't show up. Some wonder why our political parties have become more extreme, why Congress is in a stalemate and compromise is nowhere to be found. A major reason is that many of the people who would provide either of our political parties with some semblance of balance have left the party altogether. This is not an abstract or symbolic argument. In many states, you cannot vote in a party's presidential primary unless you belong to that party. You cannot become a party delegate and vote on the party platform unless you belong to that party. Our political institutions are built for our participation, but they do not require it. This is their weakness and their worth. Christians who are called to love their neighbor and to seek their good must consider what it looks like to our neighbors when we withdraw. John Stott, the brilliant British theologian and a father of the modern evangelical movement, wrote that when society does go bad, we Christians tend to throw up our hands in pious horror and reproach the non-Christian world. But should we not rather reproach ourselves? One can hardly blame unsalted meat for going bad. It cannot do anything else. The real question to ask is, where is the salt? Where is the salt? Withdrawal from politics and our political parties is not the answer. The Republican Party needs now more than ever Christians advocating from within for a position, for example, on foreign aid and international development that respects human dignity and takes America's moral leadership abroad seriously. The Democratic Party needs now more than ever Christians advocating from within it for recognition, say, that abortion is not a moral good, that it is not how a just society addresses unintended pregnancies, and that respect for human dignity and a sense of protecting the vulnerable extends to those not yet born. The Christian's duty in politics is the same as every citizen's, to affirm what is good and speak out against that which is not. Finally, hope should also inform the way we approach our political commitments and decisions, for hope should lead us to humility. Christians have an obligation to be involved in politics, but we do not belong to our politics. Since our identity is not found in our politics, we are freed up to pursue unlikely alliances, consider other points of view, and love our political enemies. In hope and humility, we can partner with and learn from different people of different faiths and backgrounds and ideological perspectives and across racial boundaries. Hope opens these doors. Hopeful politics are inclusive because hope is so open to possibility. We look for it everywhere. A spirit of humility also allows us to act without the presumption that we have all the answers, as well as without the burden of needing all the answers before we act. We are careful not to confuse our preferred policies with essential Christian doctrine, lest we fall into the trap C.S. Lewis identified and pretend, quote, that God has spoken when he has not spoken. My friends, the future of faith in American politics depends on our understanding that it is not healthy to engage in politics with our feet planted in politics. Politics cannot bear the weight of our greatest hopes. No, the safest place to engage in politics is with our feet planted firmly in the gospel, finding all of our spiritual needs are met by God, and thus being freed up to engage in politics in pursuit of the well-being of our neighbors, to seek the welfare of the place and community where we have been planted. To get the politics we need, we must become the kind of people our politics needs. This is my prayer for myself and for us all. I'm really honored to speak to you, looking forward to our conversation. Thank you very much.